Hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A session. I'm Dave McCormick from Alpha Software. I'm pleased to present our lead solutions engineer, Dion McCormick, no relation. Today, Dion is going to be going over the second part of his ink control demonstration. He'll be here to answer your questions. So before we get started, two things you should know. First, today's session is being recorded, and a copy of the session and other sessions can be found at videos.alphasoftware.com. The second thing is that we encourage you to ask questions. That's what the Q&A session is all about. So go ahead into the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel and go ahead and type in your questions. That's it. Let's get started. Hello, Dion. Are you there?
Yes, sir. Good to be back.
Great. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter.
Thank you, sir.
You should see a dialog box.
And you should see my screen in a few moments.
And I see your screen. We're all set to go.
Don't mean to scare the crowd. Be careful, you know. A little jarring. Well, cool. Hey, thank you so much, Dave. And I want to say thank you to everybody for coming out today. We really are excited to talk to you. As Dave mentioned, the most important thing for us is your questions. Help us help you by going to your GoToWebinar control panel, go into the questions area. Dave will be monitoring those and queuing them up. And as always, you can always put in your questions at guides@alphasoftware.com. That's GUIDES at alphasoftware.com. And that is a great place to put in questions. We've gotten some great ones over the last couple of weeks, and we're working furiously to put together some training materials and other information to bring to you to help us really make sure that you're getting the answers that you need. So again, take the time to go ahead and put those in, or go ahead and email those to us, and we'll be able to handle it. In fact, we're going to address one that we got. I'm not sure if this was addressed last week, but about an offshoot question of ink, which I'll go through in a few minutes. That said, a couple quick announcements and we'll get right into it. First, I wanted to say thank you so much to Chris and the team last week for doing a fabulous presentation on the WebSocket technology, something that we are going to see more and more use and more need as we do more and more mobile-oriented apps and other things that really put strains on servers. We want to use the newer architectural pieces such as sockets to reduce that, and it's a very powerful technology and technique that we're using. So again, thank you, Chris. Great job, and really appreciate you taking the time to go through that with us. This week we're going to follow up on the ink control and show you an actual demonstration of adding an ink control to your system and kind of go over a bit about how to use that, how to put that together. Also, we're going to be answering your questions there. Before I get started, just want to do a quick reminder that we are finalizing all of our training for the upcoming DevCon, which is very exciting. In fact, I saw some of the early presentations and they're just amazing. Some of the great ones are we're going to have customer showcases showing what kind of applications that are being put together out there. What's interesting is I'm starting to see a definite trend tick up of alpha applications being deployed to the application stores. So specifically to the Google Play Store and to the Apple Store, App Store. So, you know, what's great is you're going to see what people have been taking and using with alpha to actually build native-like apps for these and deploying them through the stores. So we'll have the people who've been putting those together will be there to answer your questions. So it's a great way of finding out more. Plus, we'll be doing demonstrations of all those along with all the other technical sessions. To find out more, you can go to Alpha DevCon 2016 on the home page of alphasoftware.com. Then go on in there. I'll give you all the details there. Also, we have our pre-training. And if you go to the training button here, we're finalizing all those pieces there. And this is going to be a great training on the mobile optimized forms. After you go through this training, you'll walk out knowing exactly how to put together the new forms technology and create really amazing user interfaces for your end clients, customers, users, whoever you are building for. So take the time to do that. So it's going to be a great event, a lot of fun stuff. It keeps getting better and better as the team finalizes the sessions and the speakers and the events. So please join us. It's going to be absolutely fabulous. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and continue our discussion of the ink control. Now, last time I asked you to tell us what you thought this is. we're going to avoid that this time. Some of the answers were, disturbing, and we were not very excited. No, I'm just kidding. They were all fun and really enjoyable. So again, the ink control, as we started to talk about before, is an extremely powerful control for two reasons. One is it solves a incredibly important aspect, which is I've got a mobile platform and I want to be able to communicate information back to, say, home office, whoever, and I want to do it in a natural way. And that's what the ink control can do, is by basically using your finger, you can easily communicate information in a very natural way. And more importantly is using the tools of adding a background image. You can actually mark up images using the ink control, which allow, as we talked about, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Instead of writing out a description of, say, something you've found in the field, one of your field personnel have found, they basically take a picture and draw on it and tell you exactly what's going on. And this is incredibly powerful because, A, it's a sexy kind of thing. To see this happen, to have it work is amazing. And secondly, more importantly, it's very easy to put together and build into Alpha. So as you as a developer, it doesn't take a lot of effort to put together these pieces here. So what I'm going to do is actually, the last time I'm going to go through a couple quick slides just to kind of as a reminder. If you want the last session, which was a week before last, should be on the Alpha Anywhere videos area, so you can go through that, and I go through it in a lot more detail. But the key thing I wanted to explain was that ink data is a very unique data. It is not SVG, it's its own animal. And basically it's textual in format. So even though you're seeing a visual representation of it, behind the scenes you're actually generating this kind of text. And here's an example of some simple ink that I put together to draw like a couple squiggly lines on a screen. Now the cool thing about this is that this is very efficient. So when you're collecting this data, you're actually just collecting some text information and then sending it up to the server in the case of a mobile solution. So the cool thing about it is that ink is a very kind of, I'd call it resource low cost element, meaning by adding ink to your solution, you're not adding a whole bunch of bandwidth and data you have to track and so on. It's very straightforward and it's built in with the controls. So ink is something that really, it doesn't cost a lot from a resource standpoint to add your application, but it can dramatically enhance it. In fact, in our upcoming DevCon training, part of the training is actually showing you how you can take a picture in the field and then mark it up using the ink control, all within the new form view and ink control technology. And there's zero coding. It's so cool. It's just boom, 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 and you've got this capability. It's all been thought out of and easy to use. So we're going to be covering kind of those things in the DevCon scenario. So ink is a textual format of information, and it can be added either to desktop or to mobile. You're not limited to mobile solutions there. It's a simple control, which I'll show in a few minutes, and very, very interesting to do that. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to do a quick demonstration of how to go ahead and add ink to your system. So before I do that, just quick process check, Dave, to make sure I'm coming through okay, screens and vocal and everything else.
Yep, everything is coming through.
Good. I like it nice and smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm in the Alpha Anywhere development environment. I'm at the Web Projects Control Panel, and I'm going to go ahead and click New. And by the way, if you happen to have Alpha up and running on your system, follow along. You can always throw this away, but I'll tell you, there's something called muscle memory that I find is very powerful, and it's a technique we are using in our training where you follow along as the instructor does it, and there's something very powerful about it in terms of again, you can always go back and watch the video that we record, but by doing it while watching and seeing it, it locks it in at a deeper level. So definitely we like to use muscle memory for our training, and please follow along if you get a chance. So I'm going to go ahead and click New, and I've got, in this case, I'm going to just create a UX web component, so I'm going to select Web Component. I'm going to select UX because we're building a form that's going to have an ink control on it. As you can see, we have a lot of templates for people who are new. We have a whole bunch of templates that you can use. I'm going to just go ahead and use a plain one for now, but we can just create an empty, ready-to-go template here. So I'm going to go ahead and call this ink2_UX. So I'm just giving it a name, in this case ink2, and I like to append, in my case, what kind of control it is. In this case, it's an underscore or a UX component. So now I have my UX builder here. Again, for people who are new, you can click right here and it'll show you some great videos on how to do the UX piece there. Also under help, there's the documentation, so feel free to explore that, and the team is doing a fabulous job of honing our new and improved documentation system. The more I use it, the more I love it. It's amazingly fast, and I'm able to find things very, very quickly, and it's not distributed all over the place, so it's really, really cool. So I'm now going to click over here on controls, because the ink control is the ink element is a pre-built control. And what I'm going to do is, down here, you'll notice I have my blank area here, but I have all my controls right here. So this is a data control. And by the way, what data control means is that these controls can be data bound to your database, which is really nice, meaning that it's going to take care of understanding what the data is and then writing the data to the database and reading it back. And we won't go into the data binding today, but it's very straightforward and easy. So now I'm going to go down here to the bottom, and you'll notice I have an ink control right here. Now, in case you're following along, and you don't see the ink control, you do want to check what version. I'm on version 4.2, actually a pre-release build here. So again, if you don't see ink, it may be possible you're on a previous version, so don't freak out, but just want to make sure in case that goes through there. So I'm now going to click ink, and I'm just going to call this ink control, and this is just giving it a name, and I'm going to click OK, and boom, I now have an ink control on my system. Now, if this was a data-bound control, meaning I had already told that this UX was bound to a table in the database, then I could just go down here to the data binding section, click the table, and click the field name, and boom, it would automatically bind that ink control right to the database, and in this case to a text field or a long text field in my database. And therefore, when it actually saves and restores the ink, it does all of it for you, which is really nice. And underneath it, it's collecting and saving that textual information I showed you a few moments ago. And then if it's data bound, it's actually just writing that text into the database and reading it back and doing it. So again, I want to stress that the cool thing about ink control is that it's data bound, and it can be data bound directly to a database or to a list control or to any other kind of factor. So it gives you a lot of flexibility and ease of use on how to put these together. So I've got this ink control on here. I'm going to go ahead and save, and I'm going to go ahead and do a working preview. And so when I do a working preview, it is extremely underwhelming. You'll notice that, wait a minute here, I've seen demos of ink controls. In fact, if you saw our demo last week, you saw it was nice. I don't see any controls. I don't see anything on here. I only see here is the field label and then a blank area here. Well, the reason why is we have to do a bit of configuration, and luckily Alpha has taken care of that for us, to put together the basic interface of the ink control. So your first step was to add an ink control, but now we got to take the next step to kind of set up some default settings. So what I'm going to do is, by selecting ink control here, I'm going to go down over here to the right on my properties panel, and you'll notice here I have something called ink properties. So I'm going to go ahead and click the ellipsis button. That's what I call this right here. And so you'll notice here that it's all kind of blank here, but you'll notice this is my genie to set up and configure everything about my ink control. And ink control is a pretty advanced control, meaning that there's an enormous amount of tweaking you can do to it to make it work the way you want it to. So in this case, I'm going to do what Alpha provides, which is the basic template. So you'll notice first thing here, you'll notice down below at the bottom we have an area that says Set Default Ink Editor Overlay. And so I'm going to go ahead and click that. And you'll notice that after I click that, this overlay section right here updated. And if I go ahead and look at that, you'll notice that it put a whole bunch of cool little commands in here that are structured and ready to go. So basically that tells it how I want it to view or look on the ink control. So there's the ink control, and then I want to style it to look a certain way. So now I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to go into working preview, and now you're going to see, hey, we're getting close. We've got some controls here, we've got some buttons here. If I click on them, it doesn't exactly look like what I want yet, but it's getting pretty darn close. But I've got, some other parts already built into it. I can select things here and adjust, but it's still not working the way I want it to yet, because there's one other default setting I need to do. So I'm going to go back into my designer, click on Ink Properties. Again, I've set the default ink overlay. I'm going to go over here to the CSS button, and I'm going to click CSS, and you'll notice down below is another little link saying insert the default CSS. So I'm going to go ahead and insert the default CSS, and now I have a whole bunch of CSS that has been added to my system, and I click OK. Now I can click on Working Preview, and you'll notice now that I have, as you can see right here, a ink control. So you have the ink control up here, you have your items here, you have your controls, like you can adjust things, you can erase it. It's got my little controls here. I can go around here. Actually, let me do a live preview just to show you what it looks like in a live preview. Be a little nicer here. And I'll do a full preview. And now you'll see in here, as it does a full preview, my ink control, I'm able to start drawing on it pieces there. So what's important about this, and this is very critical, is that when you add an ink control, it's kind of, let's call it, it doesn't have its user interface put together yet. And so what you need to do is, once you've added an ink control, you need to go to the ink control properties. You need to, and oh, that was one thing I did wrong. I'm sorry. I missed one step. Thank you for, or I apologize about that. So let me run through that real quick. So after you set your ink control, you need to click Set Default Class Names. That puts in these class names. You need to set the default ink editor overlay. That's going to put in this overlay information. And then you need to click CSS and click Insert Default CSS. And now, when we go to look at it, now we have the full bad boy. I'm sorry, I missed a step there. Rushing too much. I've been on vacation too much. I apologize. But now you see you have a full-blown ink control with our little moving around window, our ability to add things in here. I can move over here, add some here, etc. So the important thing to remember is when you add an ink control, you can go in here and you can first set the default CSS class names, the default overlay, and then the CSS defaulted here. Once you've clicked those three buttons, you have a full-blown one ready to go. And if you've gone ahead and data bound this to the database, you're good to go on there. And as you can see, once it's done, it's handling all this stuff for you. It'll automatically scale all this stuff, make it fit on the screen, do a whole bunch of other cool things. It's got the ability to do these fun, like, you know, if I can go in here and go make things here, and then I can scroll that down. You'll notice that it's handling all the pieces in terms of all this, so all the work is done for you. Now, as you can see, the ink control has an enormous amount of capabilities, meaning that you can set a whole bunch of, you can style it to the nth degree, and that's a whole other session. But it allows you to go in and modify every little thing about this ink control to get it to work exactly the way you want it, to look the way you want it. And actually, one of the cool things about it, and this is, I'm going to go ahead and show you one option right here, is has background image. This is kind of cool. Now, in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here on my settings. So let me show you where I got that. As I selected the ink control, I went to the ink properties, and then I went down to has background image, and I selected it here. Now it's asking me, okay, well, where's the image I want to use for this background? So now I can go in here and actually put the image name. And what I can do is I'll go to my web project control panel, go to my images, and I just so happen to have an image, just happen to be in here, called controlpanel.jpg, JPG. So I'm going to go back in here, I'm sorry, go back to my ink control, go into my ink properties, go right here to background image. I'm going to call it controlpanel.jpg for JPEG. Then I'm going to click OK. So now what I've done is I've said when this ink control gets displayed, please use a background image. Now when I do the working preview, oh, it's a live preview because we have to publish that image out there, you're going to notice something really cool. Now you'll notice that I have on my ink control a background image that's behind it. And I can actually go in here and modify all this. And you'll see as I scroll over, as I grab my bounding box right here and scroll over it, I can actually see in detail down below. And the way this is structured is obviously on a desktop app, this is kind of overkill because you can display most of this image on top and you can set things to do that. But if you're on a mobile solution with a small screen, there's no way you could show this whole image. So I can actually go, say, to this control switch right here, and I can say there's a problem right here. So you'll notice that now it has drawn the ink on top of that image, And you'll notice that I can then kind of scroll around and see where that is right there. In fact, I can say, you know what, I really want them to see that, so I'm going to highlight all this in here, and now I've got highlighted area. So you'll see it comes out really nicely on the ink control there. And what it's doing here is it's not altering the background image. This background image has been untouched. The ink control is a layer on top of it, and this red line and this yellow right here is being saved as this kind of text there in a different field. So you can combine the two together. So this is an interesting use case, is that if you're always looking at the same panel, you can put the background image and then they can load it up and be, you know, like let's say you had a customer-facing system where they're putting in a service request for their control panel. Well, you can say, well, what kind of control panel? It's control panel XYZ, and then you can show it and then have that shown on there as we go from there. Oh, hold on one second real quick. So that would allow you to make it easy for people to communicate what's going on, like what switch is having a problem, or what switch am I confused about, or something along those lines. Now, obviously, this is a bit contrived because the ink control...
Dan, I love that. Where did you get that picture from?
Which picture? The control panel?
The control panel one. Someone just suggested that it was an early version of the Microsoft phone. I don't know if it's true or not.
Oh, funny. We got a bunch of comedians.
Yeah,
I'd say stick to programming.
Oh, fair enough.
No. I just off Google. I used WebSafe though. It's Creative Commons, so I'm careful about that. Don't want to get. I don't know if anybody's ever got a nasty gram from
Getty Images, especially.
Getty Images, man, they're like, wow, scary guys.
Website that you don't own. Yep.
Exactly. They're not very nice about that. So, and they're protecting their artists, so I can't argue there. So, so in this case, obviously it's contrived because we're using a pre-defaulted panel. But everything about this is twofold. Call it everything on here is programmable. So you can actually say select your control panel, and then when you show the ink panel, you can actually tell it use this particular background image. Or in the case of a mobile solution, you can actually say whatever image is in another field, overlay the image on top of it. And that's what will go in the DevCon training, is that basically when you take a picture, what you're doing is you're putting that picture or image into a image control on your form. And then the ink control is a invisible control that sits on top of it, that then allows you to modify and then do what I showed you a few minutes ago. So that's how you can get a dynamic where you can actually take an image and then start drawing right on top of it on a mobile solution. But there's nothing to be said if you're using a desktop web, where you could have a situation where you select which image you want to use. Say it's a pre-selected set of images for a company, and then once they're on there, then you give the user the option to modify that. So the ink control, being in the nature it is that they have all these different settings that you're able to use to put together. In this case, I hard-coded that background image, but there's no reason why that can't be programmatically set to say, you know, which image is selected in a list control, show it on there. And again, very, very important, I want to be crystal clear, is that you'll notice when I go back in here, since I haven't saved this data or restored it from the database, you'll notice that my, let me go ahead and go right here, you'll notice that my ink is no longer there, because it just, you know, it flushed out that controlled error, because the ink is separate from the image, and therefore it gets saved separately and handled separately from there. So once I go through and modify this and do my little intuitive, hey, there's my problem right there. Actually, I can say, oop, I didn't like that, so let me undo that. Oops. Let's see, undo. Which one's undo? Oh, I've got erase, so I can erase it. There is an undo button, I forget. These are like navigation panels. I thought I could do that, undo. I thought there was an undo on there, but maybe I haven't set the setting on that. And anyway, sorry, I went off the rails a little bit there. But what you can do is that you save the data separately, and now that ink control can manifest itself there. And actually, we're seeing people are using the ink control not only as for drawing on images, but actually as an image, as a signature capture tool. Instead of saving a bitmap, you can actually save ink data where the person has used their mouse to draw their name or put in a signature that's in the ink control area there. And in fact, Selwyn did a great demonstration of how to use it in that way. Very nice and efficient use of that information. So that is a updated kind of quick introduction to the ink control. Just a quick refresher, super important, is once you've added an ink control, go into your properties, click Set Default CSS Class Names, Set Default in Editor Overlay, then go to CSS and insert the default CSS. And once you've done that, and granted I have a background image here, it will take care of drawing all these nice things here. And if you don't like, say, the bounding box or the color red here for this, you can go in and tweak that to your heart's desire, because that's all available within the solution from there. Now, I have one other thing before opening it up to questions. We had a question through the email from someone saying, okay, great. So in my database, I have this fabulous ink control text. But now I want to re-render that and show that on a report. Well, how do I do that? So let me go ahead and show you real quickly how you would do that. So if I go into the Alpha Web Projects Control Panel and I go to the Reports section, I'm going to go ahead and create a new report. And this SQL data source, I'm going to go ahead and use that as a free-form report on a SQL data source. I'm going to select my data connection, in this case to the Northwinds data. And let's say customers, and one of those was, so I'll just go through and put that together here. So now I've got my report editor, and if anybody's done a report edit, you'll see that here's my report data, or that my layout here, and over here are all my different controls. Well, you'll notice something is that, let's just pretend that instead of country being text, that was a ink control, meaning that it was storing ink data. And so if I go on here and I show it, you'll notice this is just showing text. And if I were to just drag this, say, quote-unquote ink control on here, it would just show that gobbledygook kind of text. And you'll notice I was looking over here when I first looked into it, I thought, oh, maybe we have a special type of toolbox control called, say, ink control, but we don't. It's a little different, a little more subtle on how to do that. So I'm going to get rid of that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this as webinar ink control display. Okay. The trick, which I found out after working with the team, is that it's handleable, but what you have to do is this. Let's go ahead and close this, and let's go back here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Data Source, Edit Data Source Definition. Okay? And so I'm going back and editing how that report knows what the table is. And so if I go here, we have our connection here that's telling which database to go to. We have the customers to here, so I've selected the customers. And so at this point in time, the report just assumes these, like, for instance, that ink control, let's say, again, instead of country, we were storing ink data in there. It's just going to assume that's text. But what we can do, which is really powerful, is we can go to advanced options down here, and we can actually tell it that I want to overwrite the field definitions of selected fields. So what a field definition is, it tells the report, okay, this is a character field, so this is a text. This is a number field, so it's there. So it's kind of giving the report editor guidance to say, what is the nature of that? So like a blob could be an image kind of scenario. So in our case, because the ink control data is just text, it gets confused a little bit in terms of how to do that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click Overwrite Field Definitions on my screen here, go to Field Definitions here, I'm going to select the item there, and you'll notice that I'm showing all my different fields. I can edit this field definition. So you'll notice right here it's saying the default field definition is character 15. So it's saying, oh, that's just a character field. I'm going to display it as character. And thus, when you saw, I showed that. But in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Edit Field Definition. And instead of data type there, I'm going to select from this drop-down right here, and I'm going to select Ink Image. And now I click OK. So now what's really cool is that the report tool now understands that the data in this data field is ink data and an ink image, not standard text. So let me walk through that real quick. I want to make sure everybody understands that. Is that when we originally defined this report, it looked at that field and it said, oh, it's like a text field. So what we need to do is tell the report editor that this is a special type of field. So I'm going to right-click on there and go to Data Source, Edit Data Source Definition. I'm going to edit the ad hoc definition. I'm going to go through these steps like it's a connection, and then I'm telling you which table. But the most important thing is this advanced options down here. And I click there. I click Override Field Definitions. I click here. I pick the field that ink data is in. I click Edit the Field Definition. And then from my drop-down, I can say, oh, this is ink image. Notice there's some other ones. I can tell it's SVG, it's HTML, it's PNG. So there's a lot of flexibility here. But I'm going to say ink definition. Click OK. Now that I've told it that's ink, I can click Finish. And now when I edit that ink report and I drag out the field that would be that ink data, let's see what happens. It's probably going to be gobbledygook here. Yeah, it doesn't show anything because I don't have valid ink data in here. But instead of displaying the text of the ink control here, what it's going to do is actually in this bounding box right here, it's going to interpret that ink data that's in that field, and the report system is going to render it as ink, as a visual ink representation. So the trick is, once you've got your report set up, you just need to edit the field definition to tell the report editor that the field that you're looking at contains ink data, and then it will do the rest for you. So a little trickier. I just thought there was an ink control over here you could drag on there. But once you go through it once, and again, this will be up and available on our video library very soon, you can set it up so you can print ink data on reports very, very simply. So that was a great question from someone. I hope I didn't confuse people because I didn't have an ink control or data in there. But what it allows you to do really quickly is to allow you to put an ink data as an image or a representation on the report that is going to show what the person, like say a signature field or a drawing there. And of course you can always set the background image of this. So like for instance, if you have a situation, you can set the background image and then overlay the ink control representation on top of it, so you can get that like control panel and top of it ink. That just takes a little bit more work to put in there. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense and helps the individual who sent in the email, and for people also, they hopefully now understand how to put together this ink stuff from there. So that covers ink. I'm sorry it went a little longer than I anticipated, but I want to make sure we got that question out of the way at the same time. And what I'd like to do is turn it back to Dave. And Dave, if you have any questions that are queued up, let us know. But I hope that made a bit of sense.
Excellent. Well, we do have a couple questions related to the ink control. So this first one is actually a perfect screen for it. Someone was asking sort of again about what type of data control are you supposed to use? In other words, what database field type are you supposed to use again to store this type of ink data? But looking at it, you could see it's you've got all three right there. Perfect.
Yes, I thought that would come across because often, you know, so in MySQL it's long text because you don't know how, the more complex, the more it's a very efficient, but you never know how much data is generated. I mean, if you have someone who's taken a big thing and written all over it, you know, so I use long text, nvarchar max, and access also has a long text field that's available because it's basically just a lot of text is all it is. So those are the ones that I've used for my database designs, and they work very well. As you get more familiar, you may realize that, oh, you know, maybe long text is overkill because most people it's only about, you know, X amount of characters that are in there. But as you can see, you know, this is a very simple couple lines, and I probably exceeded the 256 characters in a heartbeat. So this is your safe bet, is to go with these out of the gate. And you know, modern databases, they're so efficient at storing this kind of information and being able to search it. It's just, you know, you shouldn't have a lot of problem if you had multiple ink fields on a certain table. Making them all long text shouldn't cause any problems.
Excellent. And let's see what else we've got. A whole bunch of ink questions are coming in. This is super.
Excellent. Glad. We love it. Thank you.
Cool. All right, you've touched on an interesting topic, it looks like. It's the other question, and I believe you covered this 2 weeks ago, or at least touched on it. And that was sort of what is, at least at the high level, the difference between the signature capture and the ink control. And can you use the ink in place of signature or is it better to use the signature control? Would you mind going over that again?
Yeah, it's great question. And really the main difference is the signature capture achieves the same result, which is to capture a sequence of movements by a person, either a mouse or a finger on the screen. The real difference is that the signature capture will save it as a bitmap or as a blob. So it's actually saving it as image data that's in the database. Whereas the ink control will save it as textual information there. So I think over time you'll find that the ink control is probably more data, a less amount of data because you're only storing a bunch of text in there versus a certain. But you know, I think it's about 3K is what I've seen, 2 to 3K of data for these little images that are stored for the signature capture. Now, from a legal standpoint, I don't know if there's a difference between the two, and that may be an interesting kind of question. Since it is a image capture, there may be some more strength of that versus something that's stored in text, because you could go in and modify the text in the database. You know, you could also modify the ink. I'm sorry, the image, but maybe it's a little harder to do that. So from a legal standpoint, I'm not sure if there's a benefit for either other ones, but the bottom line is that signature capture is purposely meant to store bitmaps or images of the signature. It just basically has a little area you draw on it and saves that image there. The ink control is saving it as text. There's only one other thing that's available, is that the signature capture has a certain level of customization that you can do to it to tweak it. And this is kind of the good and bad news. On the ink control, when I was showing you that, as you can see, you can relay out everything about it, so you can make it look exactly how you want it to be. For instance, you can have a background image of, say, a form on there or some other things, and there's a lot of there. So I think you'll find the ink control is a little bit more flexible in terms of getting it to look and operate exactly how you want. Signature capture is more of an out-of-the-box kind of, you still have some capability to modify it, but it's a little more limited because with the ink control, there's just everything's done through CSS and HTML, and you can lay it out any way you want to. So ink versus, it's text versus image, and then the amount of customization that's you're able to do is the difference between the two.
Excellent. Here's a good question. We may not have the answer, but and that is, does the ink data, is it stored as just the final image, or does it contain all of the strokes used to produce the ink in order?
That is a great question. I think that it does both. I'd have to double check with, but I do think, and just looking at this data here, you'll notice that it's kind of in sequence, because I have pin 4 and I drew this, and then I have pin 4 with a different color and I drew this. So you can see it's kind of sequentially showing how the ink was built up with my first thing here. So I think this is kind of the settings for the ink control, width, height, unit, etc. thing there. Data was created and modified. Then I have my actual, I have one squiggly here, which was
black.
And then another one.
00, which is red. That's an RGB.
Exactly. So but you'll notice there's no timing involved here. It's not saying I did this in about X% of time. It's just more, it's capturing my quote unquote strokes that I make. And that's, I think, how it operates.
Cool beans. So someone had a question about, okay, on a report, you're able to position that field so it could display the signature capture. Would it be a way to place that, to place an image behind it, kind of like you did with your control box?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because what you can do here, hold on, let's see. What you can do here with a report is you can go in and with the report, where is that? Actually, I'm sorry, in the details section right here. So pretend, again, I apologize, but pretend that this country is my ink field right here. So now I can go into detail here, and I can go to properties, and then I can go to, where is that? Where can I set, there is a way to set, here we go. I can set a background for my report. So in this case, I clicked use there, and then I can click and embed it. So I'm going to change and put in the embedded, and let's see if I have an embedded object here. Let's just go ahead and put the control panel in there, and I click OK. Okay, so you'll notice that I embedded my control panel image in this report, and I still have my, it's kind of hard to see, but I have my ink control here. So let's say I wanted to, I could, in this case, I could sit there and go, okay, boom, there, my ink control completely covers the background image. So it's going to render that ink on top of it like I did in there. Or if I want to be a little fancier, I can make this a little smaller. And again, I apologize, it's probably a little hard to see because we basically have a couple black and white images, but I can say I want the ink control to be right there. And then when I do a preview of this, what it's going to do is in my detail form, it's going to render the background, which is the image. And then, let's see, can I zoom any more there? Then it's going to render the text on in that spot. So I guess it's, let me see, I think what I can do here is I can set the properties of it. Let's do it to stretch. So I'm going to stretch the image there. Let's see what happens when I preview it now and see if it grabs more of the screen. There we go, okay. And so where I put that field, it's going to put it on there. So not a great example here because I don't have ink control in there, but what you can do is drag and put that country. Let's try it right there. Let's see if I can get it so it's working just where I want it to be there. And this should just show regular data on top of there because it's going to overlay the data on top, one on top of the other. So it's not showing any data. So let's go to the next page. Is there a country on that? No, for one, it's not showing my data properly. But that's how you would do it. You would you go to detail, properties, and then you go to the bitmap section and you can say change the bitmap, which is your background there. And then once you've done that, then you're able to then overlay on top of it your ink control and thus achieve that form kind of concept. If you had a form saved as an image and then you can overlay the ink as the signature part on top of it. Plus on that form you can put like company name, you could put that on another spot on that form. So it's sort of like absolute layout functionality from there, and that should do that for you.
And I suspect with a field like that, you'd need to set the background so it was transparent, not
yes,
white.
That is correct. I'm not sure why it's not. Oh, there it is. It is showing there. It's just it's kind of I'm off in my.
Oh, yeah, I see it. It's the same.
It's kind of hidden in there, and it's probably what's going on is that I've got what I would probably do is right now I've got like a little small image that I'm stretching. So I would probably predefine the image to be 8.5 by 11, so it's perfectly sized, and then on those there. So I'll just click best fit and see what happens when I go there. So there's a little trial and error, but again, the idea is you can layer the background image and then have on top of it. Yeah, for some reason it's showing that. Do I have two images on here? Not sure. Anyway, that shows you doing there. So you just layer where you want that on there, a little trial and error, and boom, once you've got it running, it's going to run like clockwork every time. It will line up perfectly and show it. So that's how you would achieve it, is use the background image for your detail area and then take your there. And again, remember, there is no like ink control formatted kind of special control, so you have to go to the data source and tell the report editor that that particular text field is going to deliver ink data so it knows how to render it onto the page.
So, question, how would you zoom the size of the ink output? Is it, can you just stretch the box and have it
yes.
that new size? Okay.
Yeah, it's gonna
size to the box.
Exactly, yeah. Like images, like if I had selected this as an image one, you could modify how it's going to represent. So a little trial and error, but once you get it, the first one, the nice thing is you can trial and error right in here with the built-in preview function of the report editor. So there we go there. Yeah. So.
All right, let's take a look through more of these questions here. Here's a question not about ink, but it has to do with UXs and grids. And the question is, the UX has a built-in function to copy or duplicate a row. What's the best way to do that in a grid?
Ah, excellent point. Okay. So let me go ahead and go in here and just show you. Let's see if I have a nice grid that I can just kind of use for the test here. So grid. Okay, let me go ahead and customer grid right here. Okay, so now I've got a working preview of this grid. This is a good example here. So you'll notice I have, the grid right here. And this is a data bound grid, so I've bound it to my customers table here. Then in my grid, I have in my fields the customer ID, the company name. In this case, this is an editable grid, contact name, and then I've added some buttons. So the way I would approach duplicating a field in here, there's no built-in kind of duplicate row function built into Alpha. But what you can do, which is very, very powerful, is you can add a button. So I'm going to go ahead and add a button here to the grid, okay? And I'm going to call this clone, okay? So I've added a new button. It's called clone. Nothing there. Now I'm going to go down here to the on-click event, click that to open it up. And I'm going to add an action on here, which is an AJAX callback. So the way I'm actually going to do this is I'm going to clone row. Okay, so I'm going to call a function on the server called clone row, and I'm going to go ahead and create that. So I'm going to insert that function. There we go. And so now what happens is, and let me go ahead and just show you a little bit here. So now when I run this, and let me go ahead and go to my XBasic functions, and I'm just going to say clone row is equal to, bear with me when I do this here. So now when I do my thing, I've got a button on my row, and when I click that button, it's going to run an AJAX callback, meaning it's going to call the server and run some code there. Now, in this case, all I'm doing is sending back a little message just because I wanted to show that when I hit clone, it did the button there. So I click OK. Now what I would do is I'd go into my XBasic function right here, and the most important thing you need to realize is that the e.currentRows key 1 will have the unique key for this record. So let me go ahead and change this now to, and I hope this isn't too deep, but let's see, let's go ahead and put this, the ID for row is, okay. So what I'm doing here is that when the person clicks that button, it's going to make a callback to the server and run this little function. First thing I'm going to do in that function is determine what is the unique ID for that row. So let me see if this works properly. Let me go ahead and do this. So I'm going to click clone, and you'll notice that, check this out, it says ID for this row is alfkey, and this is alfkey right there. Now I'm going to go down here and click this one, and you'll notice it says ID for road is Bergs, which is the unique ID for this road. Now that I have that unique ID, I can write a little piece of XBasic to actually use a SQL call to clone that row. And so you can actually just, what you would do in that case is that you would make use XBasic to run a little script to copy that row in the database, and then the last thing I would do is then send back a refresh to the grid to refresh it now that that new row is in there, and then if there's any errors to alert the person that there's a problem. So the real basics is put a button on your grid. In that button, do a AJAX callback, which will call a specific function. You'll notice I used the trick here, create function prototype, which writes all the, puts together a little shell script for me, and then I can paste it into my XBasic functions there. When that function is called, the first thing you want to do is get the unique ID for the row you're on, so you know what row you want to operate on. Then you write in here, and I won't be able to have time to do it today, but you would write the little script right here to say, just send in, you just use a SQL command saying, there's some nice SQL little scripts that allow you to clone a row very easily, even if you have a row that's got like an auto increment in it. And what it does is it basically, you would feed it that unique ID so you know which record you're cloning. And then the last thing you want to do is to do what's called a refresh. And actually, just to show you how that works, is I'm going to change this from giving a message. So let me go ahead and copy this, go right here, and I'm going to go I think it's grid.object.refresh. Okay. And then now what happens is that after I do my clone operation, what's going to happen here is that when I hit clone, it's going to refresh the rows that are in there. So let's say I was in the middle. It's just a little trick here. And if I click clone here, you'll notice in a moment, it noticed I changed that. It refreshes your row for you. And therefore, if you clone this, then what will happen is that new row will show up in your grid. So that's just a little nice thing, is after you write you grab the current key, you run your little XBasic script to clone that row, and then the last thing you want to do is send back this little command called grid.object.refresh, because what it will do is it will refresh the grid, and then when it refreshes the grid, the new row will appear and show up. And so that's the general, I hope that's enough to get you going on there. But that's how you would approach it. I'd use an XBasic callback. There's really no way within a grid to do a client-side kind of operation. With list controls, you can do a bunch of client stuff to create a new record in the list and copy the results from one to another. But in regards to the grid control, it's kind of more older school, so it's kind of limited more to doing things on the server side. Actually, I take that back. I think there is a way to programmatically open a new row, insert some data there, but I find this is the most reliable because all you have to do is run that little XBasic code against the database, and then the database will do the clone, and you refresh the grid, and boom, there your new record is shown to you. So hopefully that covers the question.
Wonderful, thanks, Dan. Another question for you. Actually, I've got two questions, both of which are a little bit too big to handle during our Q&A session, but maybe we could talk about them in broad terms. The first one has to do with how to use a form view control, say for a web application, and the other one has to do with Bootstrap and Alpha Anywhere. Now, I know both of these things are things we're covering at the conference, at sessions that you're doing, Dan, including the training. But I was wondering if you might be able to give us any pointers in either one of those two topics.
Yeah, again, way beyond the scope of our limited time here to go through that. Let me tackle the first one, the form view control. Is actually, if you go up into the documentation and go ahead and go form view. Hold on a second, form view. In here, that's the action there. You click the wrong one here. I think it's form view is all one word, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, there we go. I think so. Okay, gotcha. There are some great videos that have already been put together. Just kind of get your hands around it there. Not to be vague or anything like that, but in the form view control, we have there's a combination of the data that's here to talk about a form view control and how to add it to your there. Also, you can go to help, open document, actually not documentation, to the video section, video finder. Oh, is it on this one? I don't know if there's form view. I think they may, because I know we're kind of moving away from this built-in one. But if you go to alphasoftware.com, and then when you get to Alpha Software, you go to Resources, Video Library, and you'll see the shortcut is alphasoftware.com/video-library. In here are some really good ones on tablet optimized, some basic videos on how to use that. And let's see when it comes. I'm sorry, it's taking a moment because we're doing the webinar.
It's
the webinar and share screen.
Oh yeah, sure. Just so you know, we are working on replacing this video library. We're rewriting it again. This will be the third rewrite, this time in alpha. So we know how it works. So that'll probably be out in a couple of weeks.
So there's some great videos on here in terms of all of the new tablet optimized form stuff. That so you can just go in here, click search, and click form view. Let's see if see that CS form views. So what you can, I see down here, you can go to tablet, introduction to the form view control right there.
That's a good one right there.
Yeah, that one's right there. And let me go ahead and see if I can put that. I'm jumping back over. Bear with me, everybody, to the chat window. Hopefully that came through.
Yep, I see it. Not everyone has the chat window. So if you don't have the chat window, if you were at home and you need this link, just go ahead and send an email to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com, and I will get you out the link.
Hey, and Dave, check out my imitation of Selwyn.
All right.
Getting pretty good at, mimicking his voice.
No, I'm not hearing it, man. It's not coming through. It's not playing through.
Oh, wow. Maybe it doesn't come through. Yeah, no. Anyway, I was just playing this video here, and it's by our fabulous Selwyn Ravens. His dulcet tones. That's the way, he's like a crooner from the 50s or something like that by the time you watch enough of his videos there. Anyway, so that's a great one. It's, again, as he said, it's a very simplistic one, but just to kind of get you an idea of what it can do. And the difference between this and what we're doing at DEF CON is we're literally step-by-step building a pretty complex app in a very short period of time using form, view, and pieces there. And it's the way to go if you really are interested in getting there. But in the meantime, since you don't have to wait, just go to that video right there, and that will get you started. And as you notice, there's a whole bunch of other videos displaying, capturing ink control data, etc., using the camera and all the other pieces for mobile forms.
So you do want to just touch on quickly in the last 3 minutes?
Yeah, Bootstrap. First and foremost is that we're really making a lot. Alpha is making a huge amount of strides in terms of Bootstrap and getting it to use more and easier to use it. As Alpha more aligns with industry standards, CSS and HTML, it's becoming simpler there. I'd say if I would boil it down, there's two aspects to Bootstrap. Is that first, I always like to show people if you go to www.themeforest.net, and if you go to themeforest.net, this is an online, they have online templates. And so they have a huge amount of Bootstrap templates that are available there. So you can go to admin templates and other pieces there. And then they have a whole bunch of admin tabs. So you can go in here. Let's look at this one. And we can look at that. And as you can see, hey, you know what? I want this to be there. So I tend to use these as my starting point. You can start with the Bootstrap basic architecture. It's a off-the-shelf template, or really a framework that's provided by Twitter, was the original people who put it together. But as you notice, it has a standard set of ways to do menus and other things. So all of you're seeing right here is underneath this is their Bootstrap template. And then on top of it is a whole bunch of CSS, and then they add in other things like different, this is a third-party graphing tool and things like that. But the nice thing about this is that, they've done all the hard work of putting together the styling. And that's often hundreds, if not thousands of hours of time for people to put together a nice-looking styled web sheet. Now, the tricky parts with Bootstrap, and again, this is where I'm going to touch more in our presentation. Step number one is that Bootstrap uses jQuery, and jQuery and Alpha, you have to be a little careful. And I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about it, but the idea behind it is that Alpha also uses jQuery, but sometimes the Alpha libraries step on the third-party libraries, and the third-party libraries step on there. So if you're using a JavaScript library that came with your admin, say for doing the menus or something like that, there's a step you have to go through to process those files so that they'll play nicely with Alpha. So that's step number one. And then step number two is then actually embedding the Alpha components into a page that then has all the Bootstrap stuff around it. So it's sort of a two-step. One is you have to make sure that any libraries you're using with the Bootstrap template are compatible with Alpha and they play nicely. And again, Alpha provides some off-the-shelf tools to allow you to do that. And then step two is just the mechanics of embedding a UX or a grid or whatever into a page, and that's just sort of a manual kind of step that goes through, and you can do that. It's all built into Alpha, no rocket scientist to it. So those are the two things to it. But the beauty of it is you can now use really powerful, and in fact, let me go ahead and do this here. Let's see. Oh, actually, let me go right here. Let me get here. Bear with me. So to give you an example, what you will produce in the end is this. log on to a live system that we have up here. So you notice this is all Bootstrap. Nice looking there. Now we have a nice Bootstrap menu here and these nice drop-down menus here. This is all alpha.
Ooh, very nice.
So when I go into action, go to action items, you'll see that I have my Bootstrap stuff, but now I have this as an alpha 5 grid. And this is just an alpha 5 grid. And so there's some tweaking with CSS and stuff, but the beauty is you get this nice, modern Web 2.0, but then you get the power of doing all your controls and all your complex stuff in here, including if I want to go in and open up an edit form, then I can go in here to there, and again, it's a little slow because of this, but now this is just an alpha UX component, but you wouldn't know it because it's all been styled and we're using different buttons. And you'll notice this component also has a built-in grid and a built-in file area and things like that. So that's real quick and dirty. I know we don't have much time. We're almost essentially there, but that tells you a little bit more about what we'll be talking about in detail. But it's a combination of making sure the libraries don't step on each other, and then the actual process of integrating the alpha pieces into the Bootstrap pages.
That is terrific. And we are, in fact, out of time. Dan, thank you very much for presenting.
My pleasure.
Who showed up today and who asked questions. We hope to see you next week at a future webinar. A copy of today's session can be found at videos.alphasoftware.com. In the meantime, if you want to submit questions to us in advance, go ahead and send them to guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com. Thanks again for attending, and we hope to see you next week. Take care, and goodbye.